Welcome to our sanctuary of stillness, a space created to guide you into deep, complete, and restful sleep. It's time to set aside the weight of the long day. Leave every thought, every worry, quietly outside the door. Now, allow yourself to relax. Lie down in a comfortable position. Slowly feel each part of your body releasing, softening, and sinking deeper into the gentle embrace of the bed. Relax your forehead. Relax your shoulders. Relax your mind. Tonight, we will not use philosophy to think, we will use it to let go. You don't need to understand anything. You don't need to remember anything. Just listen. Let this voice and these gentle reflections flow over you like calm water, soothing and quieting your thoughts. And now, take a deep breath in and exhale slowly. Together, let us drift peacefully into sleep. And as your body settles into this calm, weightless silence, let your mind begin a quiet journey, a journey through the timeless wisdom of Laozi. In the stillness between each breath, we will walk the ancient path of the Tao, discovering how effortlessness, softness, and balance can dissolve every layer of tension within you. Now, let us begin. Laozi, the sage whose name means old master, stands at the dawn of Chinese philosophy as both a historical mystery and an eternal voice of tranquility. Legend says he was born already old, a child with white hair who laughed upon entering the world, as if he had seen through all of life's illusions before it began. Whether or not this is literal hardly matters, for it captures the timeless presence that surrounds him, a presence that never sought fame, yet outlived emperors. He left behind a single book, Tao Te Ching, barely 5,000 characters long, yet it has shaped millennia of thought about peace, power, and the art of letting go. In a world obsessed with struggle, Laozi dared to say, "Stop fighting." He did not mean surrender to despair, but to return to the rhythm that all things obey, the Tao, the way. This way is not a path you walk. It is the flow that carries all things, from the falling leaf to the turning galaxy. Stress, in this philosophy, is not caused by the world itself, but by resistance to this flow. The more one clings, the more one suffers. The less one interferes, the more naturally things unfold. Historically, Laozi lived in the late 6th century BCE, during China's spring and autumn period, an age of wars, rival kingdoms, and political chaos. Yet amid this turbulence, his message was one of profound quietude. He worked as an archivist in the royal court of Zhou, surrounded by scrolls and history, watching rulers rise and fall. It said he saw that every empire built on ambition would one day devour itself. So when a young Confucius visited him, hoping to discuss propriety and moral order, Laozi told him bluntly, "Let go of your arrogance. The men you speak of are already dust." One curious and little-known story tells that before Laozi left the Zhou capital for good, the gatekeeper of the Western Pass stopped him. The old master was leaving civilization, disappearing into the desert. But the guard begged, "Please, write something before you go." And so Laozi sat under the fading sun, took out his brush, and wrote Tao Te Ching, a final whisper to humankind about how to live without the burden of striving. When he finished, he handed the book over, smiled, and vanished into the mist of legend. No one saw him again. His disappearance was not an escape, it was his final teaching. To dissolve into the way is to let the ego dissolve. To disappear is not to die, it is to become part of everything. Laozi's life is a metaphor for the lesson this entire philosophy embodies, that the ultimate mastery is not domination, but effortless being. He did not build temples or declare commandments. He left no disciples. And yet, thousands of years later, his words still ripple through the silence of night, teaching anyone willing to listen how to make stress disappear not by conquest, but by harmony. In this first step of our journey, we stand where Laozi once stood, between chaos and stillness, between the urge to act and the wisdom of yielding. His way is not about escape from the world, but about sinking so deeply into its flow that one no longer struggles against it. Stress, he might say, is the tension between the self and the Tao. Peace, then, is the reunion of the two. The story of Laozi is not a biography, but a mirror reflecting the part of us that still believes peace must be earned, when in truth, it is already within reach, waiting only for us to stop resisting. The Tao begins where words fail. Laozi opens his Tao Te Ching with a paradox so deep it still confounds scholars today. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. At first glance, this seems like a riddle meant to frustrate, but it is, in fact, a release. What Laozi is saying is that reality, true reality, cannot be contained in language, definition, or control. The more we try to grasp it, the more it slips away. The more we name it, the more distant it becomes. Stress, in this sense, begins the moment we insist that things must fit our words, our categories, our expectations. To understand the Tao, one must stop trying to understand. The Tao is not something you can know like a fact. It is something you can feel, like the warmth of sunlight or the stillness before dawn. It is the rhythm beneath all rhythms, the pulse of the cosmos, the breath that moves through all living things. Laozi describes it as the mother of 10,000 things, the generative void from which all forms emerge and to which all return. It has no agenda, no morality, no bias, yet everything that lives depends on it. Historically, this was a radical idea. During Laozi's time, China was dominated by moral and political debates: how to govern, how to maintain order, how to impose virtue upon the people. The Confucians sought structure and duty. The legalists demanded law and punishment. Laozi stood apart. He proposed that the universe already governs itself, perfectly, without interference. Just as a seed knows how to sprout and the moon knows how to wax and wane, life has its own intelligence. To force it is to wound it. To align with it is to thrive. One rare, fascinating detail from ancient commentaries describes the Tao as Ziran, often translated as self-so or of itself thus. It means that everything that happens naturally, without need for command. This single word contains the heart of the Taoist worldview. Things do not need to be made right. They are right when left to unfold in their own way. The sage, then, is not someone who changes the world, but someone who allows the world to change without resistance. Imagine a tree growing on a mountainside. The wind bends its branches, rain soaks its roots, frost cracks its bark, yet it never complains, never doubts the wisdom of the mountain. The tree does not strive to be perfect. It simply grows. This is the Tao in motion, effortless, impartial, endless. In human life, stress arises when we fight against this current. We force outcomes, chase control, and measure our worth by how much we can make the world obey. But Laozi reminds us the Tao does not obey, it flows. In modern terms, this philosophy aligns uncannily with the language of physics and ecology. The Tao resembles what we now call systems theory, the understanding that everything is interconnected and self-regulating. Just as an ecosystem maintains balance without a ruler, the Tao sustains harmony through mutual adaptation. To live against this natural balance is to generate tension, friction, and exhaustion. To move with it is to discover a serenity that requires no effort. There is also a subtle warning in Laozi's teaching. He suggests that when humans forget the Tao, morality appears. When the natural harmony is lost, we invent rules to replace it. In other words, virtue that must be enforced is not real virtue. Peace that must be maintained by control is not true peace. This inversion lies at the heart of all modern stress. We keep building systems to control life, governments, schedules, algorithms, yet in doing so, we move further from life itself. And so, to begin to let stress disappear, one must first acknowledge that peace is not created, it is remembered. It was there before we began to fight for it. It exists in the silent intelligence of the Tao that guides both galaxies and the human heart. Laozi's teaching is not to become something greater, but to return to that unforced flow, that original rhythm that needs no justification. When you stop naming, you start knowing. When you stop striving, you start being. And in that quiet being, the Tao moves through you like water through stone, soft, invisible, yet eternally powerful. Among all the teachings in the Tao Te Ching, none is more misunderstood yet more essential than Wu Wei, often translated as non-action, though that translation misses its brilliance. Wu Wei does not mean doing nothing, it means acting without forcing. It is the art of effortlessness, the state of alignment in which action and nature are no longer in conflict. Laozi saw that the root of human suffering was not the presence of effort, but the attachment to control, the belief that one's will must always overpower the world. To him, this obsession with force was the great disease of civilization. In history, Laozi's notion of Wu Wei stood in sharp contrast to the ethos of his time. The rulers of the warring states believed that order could be achieved only through strict command and punishment. Yet Laozi taught that the greatest ruler governed so lightly that the people believed they governed themselves. This was not political trickery. It was a reflection of the Tao itself. The universe, he observed, achieves everything without domination. The seasons turn, rivers flow, stars move, yet none of these struggles. To act like the Tao, then, is to act naturally, to allow results to arise through harmony rather than control. A fascinating but lesser-known story from early Taoist texts tells of an archer who practiced day and night to perfect his aim. When he finally became so skilled that he could split an arrow mid-air, his teacher smiled and said, "Now put the bow down." The student was confused why stop when mastery had been achieved. The teacher replied, "Because now you must learn to shoot without shooting." It was a paradox, and yet the meaning was clear. True mastery arrives when skill and effort disappear into one seamless motion. Wu Wei is this seamlessness, the state where mind, body, and action merge so completely that there is no interference, no self-consciousness left to create tension. In the modern world, this state might resemble what psychologists call flow, the effortless concentration, where artists, athletes, and musicians lose track of time. But Wu Wei is even deeper. It is not a temporary focus, it is a way of living. It means responding to life as water responds to gravity, always moving where it must, yet never straining to do so. Laozi described it beautifully. The Tao does nothing, yet nothing is left undone. This means that all things naturally resolve themselves when left to their own rhythm, and any attempt to accelerate or manipulate that process only invites suffering. Stress thrives on the illusion that force equals effectiveness. Society rewards the one who pushes harder, who stays longer, who never rests. Yet in Laozi's philosophy, the sage moves slower, not out of laziness, but out of perfect timing. He acts when the time is right and refrains when it is not. He plants seeds but does not tug at the sprouts to make them grow faster. He trusts the invisible current of cause and effect. Such trust dissolves anxiety, for once you recognize that the Tao itself is working with you, not against you, the need to struggle vanishes. Historically, this principle inspired generations of Chinese scholars, generals, and poets. The great strategist Zhuge Liang, during the Three Kingdoms period, was said to embody Wu Wei in war-winning battles by using the enemy's force against itself, often avoiding violence altogether. The poet Tao Yuanming practiced it in the field, tending his garden with no ambition, finding in the weeds more wisdom than in the court. Both understood that Wu Wei was not retreat, but rhythm, the rhythm of life itself. One little-known interpretation from the Taoist master Zhuangzi suggests that Wu Wei is like the heart of a mirror. It reflects all things but holds on to none. Stress, by contrast, is what happens when the mirror tries to grab its reflection when we cling to outcomes, replay conversations, or demand certainty. To live through Wu Wei is to allow each moment to arise and pass without entanglement. It is to become a participant in the world's flow rather than its opponent. If you've ever felt a moment of clarity and stillness, a breath that seemed to reset your whole body, you've already touched Wu Wei. It asks nothing of you but this: stop resisting. The storm quiets the moment you stop fighting the wind, and in that quiet, you discover that everything you were trying so hard to control is already unfolding perfectly, without your struggle. The world does not need your tension. It only needs your trust. If Wu Wei is the art of moving without resistance, then water is its perfect metaphor. No symbol in the Tao Te Ching appears more often or carries deeper meaning. Laozi writes, "The highest goodness is like water. Water benefits all things and does not compete. It stays in places that others disdain. Therefore, it is close to the Tao." To Laozi, water was not just a poetic image, it was the embodiment of the way itself, soft, patient, adaptable, yet powerful enough to carve canyons and shape continents. Historically, the rivers of ancient China defined civilization itself. The Yellow River was both a giver and taker of life, nurturing crops, yet unleashing floods. Farmers and rulers alike feared and revered it. Laozi saw in this balance a lesson that the softest thing in the world could overcome the hardest. "Nothing in the world is softer than water," he said. Yet nothing can better overcome the hard and the strong. For him, this was not just geology, it was psychology. In every conflict, whether between armies or within the human heart, Gentleness triumphs where aggression fails. A lesser-known historical detail reveals that early Taoist practitioners used literal water meditation, sitting near rivers or listening to the sound of flowing streams to harmonize their breath with nature's rhythm. They believed that as the mind mirrored water's calm, thoughts would settle and clarity would rise to the surface centuries later. This method quietly influenced Chan Buddhism, later Zen, where monks practiced silent illumination by observing the movement of water as a metaphor for their own consciousness. In water's humility lies the essence of Laozi's stress-free philosophy. Water never argues with gravity, never complains about the shape of the land. It simply finds the lowest point, the path of least resistance, and there it rests, quietly, until the next movement comes. Stress, in contrast, is the refusal to flow, the attempt to force the river upstream. When we insist that life obey our plans, we become rigid, brittle, and exhausted. Laozi's insight was that the soft and yielding survive because they adapt. The hard and inflexible break because they resist. Consider how this wisdom appears in the smallest human moments. A heated argument cools the instant one person chooses silence. A tangled problem unravels the moment one stops grasping for control. This is water's intelligence, not passive, but responsive. It moves when pushed and stills when left alone. In modern psychology, such responsiveness mirrors emotional regulation, the ability to yield without collapsing, to feel without drowning. Laozi understood this balance long before the language of therapy existed. One rare interpretation from Han Dynasty commentaries described water as the sage's temperament, transparent yet deep, calm yet unstoppable. The sage, like water, nourishes without claiming credit. When stress accumulates, it's often because the ego wants to be seen, to prove, to win, to be right. Water dissolves the ego by reminding us that true power never announces itself. The river does not boast as it carves stone. It simply flows. Historically, we find echoes of this idea in art and governance. During the Tang Dynasty, poets like Wang Wei and Li Bai were inspired by Laozi's imagery of water to express the unity between nature and spirit. One lesser-known emperor, Xuanzang, was said to have kept a quiet fountain near his meditation hall, believing that listening to the sound of running water helped him make wiser decisions, a symbolic reminder that leadership must remain fluid. In daily life, to live like water is to practice gentle persistence. It means not to suppress emotion, but to let it move through, to release rather than resist. When stress strikes, water teaches us to pause and feel its current, to sense where life is already trying to lead us. Every droplet finds the sea, not by effort, but by gravity, by the silent intelligence that pulls all things home. And perhaps this is why Laozi saw water as sacred. It cleanses without judgment, adapts without losing itself, and rests wherever it is placed. To learn from it is to remember that we, too, are made mostly of water, that peace is not something to create, but something to remember in our own nature. When we stop damming the flow of life, we discover the still lake within, clear, reflective, and endlessly deep. If water reveals the wisdom of gentleness, then letting go reveals the wisdom of trust. Laozi saw control as the great thief of peace, the hand that tightens until it strangles the very thing it tries to hold. To hold and fill to overflowing is not as good as stopping in time. He wrote, "Sharpen a blade too much and it will soon dull." These words, written over 2,000 years ago, speak directly to modern anxiety, our endless drive to perfect, to achieve, to manage every detail until we collapse beneath the weight of our own effort. Stress, in its purest form, is control turned inward. Historically, Laozi's China was a world of constant ambition. Kings sought to unify warring states through conquest. Scholars argued for moral authority. Farmers fought the earth for abundance. Laozi looked upon this feverish striving and saw the same mistake repeated everywhere, the belief that harmony could be forced. His message was not passivity, but patience. To him, peace was not something one built, but something one uncovered once the dust of striving settled. There's an obscure anecdote from early Taoist folklore about a man who tried to help a butterfly out of its cocoon. Unable to watch its struggle, he gently tore the silk open. The butterfly emerged easily, but its wings never hardened. It could not fly. Laozi would have smiled at this tale. It captures the paradox of interference. When we cannot bear to let life unfold in its own rhythm, we rob it of its strength. In our rush to relieve discomfort, we interrupt the very process meant to transform us. Letting go, for Laozi, was not resignation, but participation. It means trusting that the Tao knows what it is doing, even when we do not. Just as seasons turn without our command, events too have their own cycles of becoming and fading. Modern science now calls this homeostasis, systems returning to balance naturally. Laozi saw it long before biology named it the truth that the universe, left unforced, returns to equilibrium. When we interfere, we create imbalance. In his lifetime, this philosophy of non-control made Laozi both revered and feared. Some rulers considered him subversive because his teachings undermined authority. If people could trust nature over law, or the Tao over decrees, what need was there for power? Yet others saw in his wisdom a model for governance. The Tao Te Ching was studied by statesmen who believed a ruler should act like a gardener, guiding by removing obstacles, not by pulling the plants. Rule a great nation as you would cook a small fish, Laozi said, meaning, do not overhandle it. Even the smallest interference can ruin the flavor. A rare, fascinating historical note tells that a few centuries after Laozi, Emperor Wen of Han reportedly tried to rule according to these Taoist principles. He reduced taxes, relaxed punishments, and allowed local communities to govern themselves. Historians later called his era the Golden Age of Tranquility. It was proof, perhaps, that non-interference could succeed even on the grandest scale, that letting go was not chaos, but wisdom. In personal life, Laozi's lesson strikes even deeper. To let go of control is to let go of fear. Fear that without our constant pressure, life will collapse. But the truth is, the opposite life collapses because of our pressure. When we learn to release the grip on plans, on outcomes, on perfection, we discover that things still function, often better than before. The breath continues without command. The heart beats without instruction. The world moves whether or not we push it. A lesser-known Taoist practice called Ting Jing, listening stillness, embodies this principle. Practitioners sit quietly and sense the subtle changes in their environment, temperature shifts, sounds, even the energy in the air. They train themselves to respond, not to react, to let their awareness move before their will. The practice teaches that the universe is already whispering guidance if we stop shouting instructions. the more we let go, the lighter life becomes. And yet, paradoxically, this surrender brings not loss, but power, the power to flow with events, to bend without breaking, to rest without retreat. Laozi would remind us that stress is a symptom of mistrust in the Tao. The moment you believe you must carry the universe, you begin to shake under its weight. But the moment you remember that the Tao carries you, your tension dissolves like mist under sunlight. In letting go, you do not abandon life, you join it. You stop swimming against the river and start floating with it, guided by a current older and wiser than any thought. And when you finally release the need to control, what's left is not emptiness, but peace, a peace that does not depend on circumstances, because it flows from the very nature of being itself. If letting go is the art of trust, then softness is the proof of wisdom. In the Tao Te Ching, Laozi wrote, "The softest thing in the world overcomes the hardest." This single line captures the paradox that lies at the heart of Taoism, that true strength is not found in resistance, but in resilience, not in stiffness, but in suppleness. Laozi looked at nature and saw that the newborn child, whose body is flexible and yielding, is closer to life than the corpse, which is rigid and unbending. What bends survives, what resists breaks. To live without stress, one must learn to be soft again. Historically, this insight reflected Laozi's deep observation of both people and politics. He lived in an age when rulers valued hardness and discipline, in law, in warfare. The harder the sword, the prouder the empire. Yet Laozi saw that this hardness was also the cause of their ruin. Empires that refused to adapt crumbled under their own weight. Soldiers who glorified rigidity fell to those who could move like water, bend with circumstance, and strike when the time was right. His lesson was universal life itself favors flexibility. A lesser-known passage from an early Taoist commentary compares the sage to bamboo. Bamboo bends under snow and wind, but never snaps. It sways, then returns to stillness. The commentator explained that softness is not weakness. It is wisdom learned through humility. Stress, in this view, is the condition of being too hard, the mind frozen in a single pattern, unwilling to yield. The solution is not to fight the hardness, but to soften it, to warm it with awareness until it melts back into flow. In modern psychology, this idea mirrors what we call cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift perspectives, adapt to change, and recover from uncertainty. Laozi anticipated this centuries before therapy existed. To be soft is to move through life without becoming trapped by any single identity or belief. When the mind is rigid, insisting that life must go one way, it becomes brittle, and stress shatters it. But when the mind is fluid, it flows around obstacles, just as water flows around rock. There is a beautiful, lesser-known story about the philosopher Zhuangzi, one of Laozi's intellectual descendants. He once dreamed he was a butterfly, fluttering freely with no memory of being human. When he awoke, he wondered, "Am I a man who dreamed he was a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming he is a man?" For Zhuangzi, and for Laozi before him, this softness of perception, this refusal to cling even to one's own identity, was liberation. To be soft is to be unbound by form, and what cannot be bound cannot be broken. Laozi's concept of softness was not merely emotional, it was existential. He believed the universe itself is soft at its core. The Tao, though invisible, gives birth to all things. It does not demand or dictate. It nourishes by yielding. When he said the soft overcomes the hard, he was describing the most fundamental law of nature, that patience wears down stone, that silence dissolves noise, that love heals wounds force cannot reach. Historically, this idea also shaped Taoist martial arts like Taijiquan Tai Chi, which emerged centuries later. Its slow, circular movements reflect Wu Wei and softness, yielding to an opponent's force rather than meeting it head-on. The greatest masters often appeared calm, almost delicate, yet could redirect the energy of any attacker effortlessly. Their power lay not in muscle, but in sensitivity, the ability to feel, to adapt, to move in harmony with the unseen current. Laozi's wisdom had become embodied philosophy. There's a little-known teaching in later Taoist texts: when the heart is soft, heaven opens. It means that when we release hardness, pride, anger, self-defense, we become receptive to life's guidance. Stress thrives in a closed heart. Peace enters an open one. The more we armor ourselves against pain, the more we suffocate joy. Laozi's way invites us to remove that armor, to meet the world not with tension, but with tenderness. Softness also transforms relationships. The more we insist on being right, the more conflict grows. But when we listen with humility, when we bend a little, the knot of misunderstanding loosens. Softness, in this way, is not only an inner posture, but a social grace. It allows harmony to bloom where argument once reigned. In a world that worships hardness, speed, efficiency, domination, Laozi's teaching feels almost rebellious, but the rebellion is quiet, like water eroding mountains. To practice softness is to live by the deeper rhythm of the universe, where nothing forced lasts and everything gentle endures. In the end, the soft are not conquered, they outlast. And when life bends you, remember this: every tree that reaches the sky has learned to sway with the wind. If softness is the key to endurance, then simplicity is the key to clarity. Laozi saw that the greatest source of human misery was not the world itself, but the clutter of our desires and distractions. I have 3 treasures, he wrote: simplicity, patience, and compassion. From these I never depart. Of these 3, simplicity stands first, not as poverty, but as purity. To be simple is to live close to one's nature, free from the endless craving that distorts peace into pursuit. Laozi's message was not to renounce the world, but to return to the unburdened state from which wisdom naturally arises. Historically, this call for simplicity was revolutionary. In Laozi's time, wealth and display were seen as signs of virtue. Rulers built grand palaces, and scholars debated elaborate moral codes. Laozi observed all this and saw only confusion. The more laws were written, the more people learned to cheat them. The more possessions people owned, the more anxiety they carried. He taught that abundance without contentment is poverty in disguise. He who knows he has enough, he said, is rich. A rarely mentioned historical account describes how early Taoist hermits took this lesson literally. They withdrew from cities, not in rejection of life, but to rediscover its essence. They lived with few possessions, a robe, a bowl, a brush, but cultivated vast inner landscapes of peace. One hermit, the poet Ruan Ji, was said to have played the flute for hours while gazing at falling leaves, claiming that each note erased another layer of unnecessary thought. These sages were not escaping the world. They were simplifying themselves until the world could fit inside a single breath. In Laozi's philosophy, simplicity is not just a lifestyle, it's a spiritual alignment. The Tao is simple. Nature does not overcomplicate. The tree grows, the bird flies, the river flows. None of these consult plans or principles. They follow the unspoken order. Stress arises when we rebel against that order, when we multiply options, overthink decisions, and chase what was never ours to hold. Laozi's wisdom offers a quiet alternative: to subtract instead of add, to declutter the heart until only stillness remains. A lesser-known Taoist concept closely linked to simplicity is Pu, the uncarved block. Pu symbolizes the original state of things before they are shaped by judgment or desire. In its uncut form, the block is whole, perfect, and limitless in potential. Once carved, it becomes something useful but restricted: a tool, a statue, a thing defined. Laozi's insight was that humans, too, begin as pure, spontaneous, and at peace. Stress appears when we carve ourselves into shapes the world demands: achiever, warrior, provider, success. The more we carve, the less whole we become. A little-known practice among later Taoist monks was the fasting of the heart, not abstaining from food, but from thought. They trained to release opinions and preferences until the mind became as open as space. This mental simplicity allowed perception to clear like still water after a storm. In that state, they said, the 10,000 things reveal themselves as one. The more we simplify, the more unity we perceive. The more unity we perceive, the less we suffer. For what is stress if not the illusion of separation between self and world, time and task, want and enough? Modern science now echoes this in minimalism and mindfulness. Studies show that cluttered environments increase cortisol levels, while simple, natural spaces reduce anxiety. Laozi would have smiled knowingly the external mirrors the internal. To simplify one's surroundings is to begin simplifying one's spirit. Every object, every obligation, every opinion we release frees a portion of energy once trapped in maintenance. The less we own, the more we can feel. The less we chase, the more we can breathe. There's a quiet paradox in Laozi's teaching. Simplicity is the highest sophistication. It takes great wisdom to live plainly. The child does it naturally, but the adult must unlearn years of noise to return to that clarity. Laozi's sage is not naive. He simply refuses to complicate what is already complete. He does not need to add meaning to life because life, in its pure unfolding, is already meaningful. A subtle historical note reveals that during the chaotic Qin dynasty, several generals carried copies of the Tao Te Ching into battle, not for tactics, but for calm. They believed that Laozi's verses on simplicity could still the heart amid confusion. One line in particular was whispered among soldiers: "He who conquers himself is mighty." In that sense, simplicity was a weapon, the weapon of one who cannot be shaken, because he has nothing to lose. To practice simplicity today is to remember that every layer of stress is an unnecessary layer of identity. Beneath ambition lies peace. Beneath fear lies faith. Beneath chaos lies stillness. Laozi invites us to peel away these layers, one by one, until what remains is effortless being. The simpler the life, the clearer the way. And when life becomes clear, stress becomes impossible, for there is nothing left to defend, nothing left to chase, and nothing left to fear. If simplicity clears the path, then emptiness is what allows the light to enter. Laozi's philosophy exalts emptiness not as a void of despair, but as a space of infinite potential. Mold clay into a vessel, he wrote, and it is the emptiness within that makes it useful. In this single image, Laozi turns the human obsession with fullness upside down. We fill our days with activity, our minds with thought, our rooms with possessions, and yet it is the empty space, the pause, the silence, the absence that gives life its form and peace its place to dwell. Historically, this idea was revolutionary. Most ancient philosophies equated fullness with virtue and emptiness with lack. But Laozi saw that the universe itself depends on emptiness, the hollow in a flute that allows music, the stillness between breaths that sustains life, the space between stars that lets them shine. To him, stress was not born from emptiness, but from our refusal to honor it. We fear the quiet, so we fill it. We fear stillness, so we move. We fear being, so we do. A rarely discussed Taoist legend tells of an old potter named Han, who worked for years trying to perfect the shape of his bowls. One night, he dreamt that Laozi appeared and shattered all his pots. The old sage said, "It is not the shape that holds the tea, but the emptiness inside." When Han woke, he began crafting simpler vessels, thinner, lighter, more hollow, and found that his tea never tasted purer. The lesson spread among artisans and scholars. Perfection lies not in what is present, but in what is absent. Laozi's appreciation for emptiness was also psychological. The more the mind is filled with opinions, regrets, comparisons, the less room there is for awareness. The sage, Laozi said, empties his mind and fills his belly. That is, he nourishes his being rather than his thinking. In modern terms, this aligns with what neuroscience calls resting state, the brain's natural rhythm of integration and calm when not fixated on tasks. Emptiness is not absence of thought, but the presence of peace. A little-known historical connection reveals that early Taoist monks used breathing exercises called tuna to inhale and exhale to experience this inner emptiness. They visualized each breath as clearing dust from a mirror, every exhale sweeping away attachment, every inhale restoring clarity. Over time, they reported that silence itself became a companion, not an enemy. This practice quietly evolved into the later Buddhist concept of shunyata, the emptiness that contains all things. Laozi's insights thus traveled across centuries and faiths, from Taoist meditation to Zen awareness. In everyday life, emptiness becomes the antidote to overstimulation. Modern stress thrives on excess, too many choices, too many messages, too much noise. The Taoist sage responds not by rejecting the world, but by creating space within it, a pause between demands, a breath between thoughts. This inner emptiness is not laziness, but alignment. It allows energy to flow instead of collide. A cluttered mind cannot sense the way, just as a crowded room cannot hear an echo. A fascinating yet rarely mentioned detail in ancient texts describes how even Laozi's speech embodied emptiness. He was known for long silences during conversations, speaking only after pauses that made others uncomfortable. Those moments of stillness were not hesitation, but demonstration, showing that meaning arises not from words alone, but from the silence that surrounds them. In that silence, stress dissolves, because the need to fill space with sound, explanation, or certainty disappears. To embrace emptiness is to rediscover humility. It reminds us that we do not need to be full of answers to be whole. In fact, the more we empty ourselves of certainty, the more room there is for wisdom to enter. The beginner's mind, as later Zen would call it, is the Taoist mind open, unguarded, receptive. When Laozi says, "The use of the way is in its emptiness," he means that the Tao flows best through what is hollow, not what is heavy. There is also a moral dimension here. A heart filled with pride cannot receive compassion. A mind filled with judgment cannot perceive truth. Only the empty vessel can hold the infinite. When we let go of the clutter, both physical and emotional, we return to the natural spaciousness of being. And in that space, stress has nowhere to root itself. Imagine a cup of muddy water. If you keep stirring, it stays cloudy. But if you stop and let it rest, the sediment sinks and clarity returns by itself. That is the practice of emptiness. It is not something to achieve, but something to allow. Laozi's wisdom invites us to stop stirring our lives, to let things settle until the still water reflects the sky again. In that reflection, we rediscover the vast quiet we were searching for all along. If emptiness brings stillness to the heart, then desire is what stirs the storm. Laozi warned that the root of all unrest lies in wanting. There is no greater sin than desire, he wrote, no greater curse than discontent, no greater misfortune than wanting something for oneself. In these words, Laozi did not condemn pleasure or ambition, but the restless hunger that turns the mind outward, endlessly seeking what it already possesses within. To him, the moment desire takes command, the Tao slips away, and with it, peace. Historically, Laozi lived during an age of unprecedented greed and competition. The Zhou dynasty was fracturing, kingdoms fought for dominance, and wealth was becoming the new virtue. The more people sought possessions, the more fragile they became, like candles burning brighter and shorter. Laozi observed that even success led not to peace, but to deeper craving. When gold and jade fill the hall, he warned, no one can protect them. The pursuit of wealth, fame, or control always ends the same way, with the fear of loss. What begins as ambition ends as anxiety. A rarely told anecdote from ancient commentaries describes a nobleman who once visited Laozi, frustrated that despite his riches, he could not sleep. He asked the sage how to find peace. Laozi reportedly smiled and said, "Sell your treasures and give away your horses." The nobleman laughed, thinking it a joke. But Laozi continued, "It is not the treasures that trouble you, but the fear of thieves. You have chained yourself with gold." When the man left, he was offended, yet weeks later, he returned, confessing that after giving away half his estate, he had slept through the night for the first time in years. Desire, Laozi taught, is not abundance. It is imprisonment disguised as aspiration. To understand this teaching, one must see how desire and stress share the same root, the belief that fulfillment lies somewhere else. The modern world, like Laozi's, thrives on that illusion. We are told we must be more successful, more admired, more productive, and so the race never ends. Stress is simply the heartbeat of desire. The faster it beats, the further we drift from stillness. Laozi's antidote is startling in its simplicity. Stop running. Let contentment find you where you are. A lesser-known historical parallel reveals that early Taoist hermits practiced Qingjing clarity and stillness by deliberately minimizing both possessions and desires. One such sage, Zhuoqi, became legendary for wandering the mountains without food for days, claiming to live on mist and moonlight. When an emperor invited him to court and offered luxury, Zhuoqi laughed and said, "You feed your hunger with jewels, I feed mine with freedom." His legend, though exaggerated, captured a profound truth: the fewer your wants, the fewer your worries. But Laozi's insight reaches beyond physical desire. He also warned against the subtler cravings of the mind, the desire to be right, to be praised, to be in control. These invisible hungers are the most corrosive, for they disguise themselves as virtue. We chase moral superiority, intellectual victory, spiritual achievement, and in doing so, we simply build new prisons. The sage, by contrast, has no mind of his own. He lets the 10,000 things rise and fall without clinging to judgment. It is not that he feels nothing, but that he does not own his feelings. He lets them pass through like wind through bamboo. Modern psychology now echoes Laozi's wisdom. Studies on hedonic adaptation show that pleasure fades quickly. Each achievement sets a new threshold of expectation, trapping us in a cycle of wanting more. Laozi diagnosed this millennia ago. He who knows contentment is rich. Contentment, for him, was not complacency. It was alignment. When one moves with the Tao, one ceases to grasp. And when grasping ends, stress dissolves, because nothing remains to defend or acquire. One obscure passage in the Huainanzi, a later Taoist text, expands this idea beautifully. When the heart is unfilled by desire, heaven fills it with peace. This was not moralism, but mechanics, an observation of how the human spirit operates. Desire occupies the space that peace needs to live. The more we demand, the less we can receive. Thus, emptiness and contentment are not opposites, but partners. Emptiness makes space. Contentment fills it with ease. Historically, Laozi's students applied this principle not only to personal life, but to governance. They believed that when rulers desired too much, too many taxes, too much control, rebellion followed. A state at peace, like a person at peace, must know when to stop. The Tao curbs excess, smooths sharpness, tempers brightness, restoring balance wherever grasping has gone too far. Even nature follows this law. When one season grows too hot, another cools it. Life always seeks equilibrium. Stress arises only when we refuse to trust that rhythm. To live without desire, in Laozi's sense, is not to renounce the world, but to participate in it fully, without attachment. One eats, works, loves, and dreams, yet never confuses these acts with identity or salvation. Life is allowed to unfold, not as a conquest, but as a dance. The sage enjoys everything, yet clings to nothing. He moves through abundance, as water moves through earth, nourishing, never possessing. Desire, like stress, tightens the mind. Contentment loosens it, and once loosened, the soul remembers what it always knew, that peace is not found in adding more, but in needing less. Laozi's wisdom whispers across centuries that the way to end the storm is not to fight the wind, but to lower the sails and let the current carry you home. If desire clouds the heart, then harmony clears it. For Laozi, the world's most sacred law was balance, the ceaseless interplay of opposites that sustains all existence. All things carry yin and embrace yang, he wrote, and through the blending of these forces, harmony is achieved. This is not a mystical abstraction, but a lived reality, seen in every sunrise and tide, every breath we take, the inhale and the exhale, the rise and the fall, the doing and the resting, all are parts of a single rhythm. Stress arises when we cling to one pole and reject the other, when we want only daylight without dusk, gain without loss, success without stillness. Laozi's cure for tension is not to eliminate conflict, but to see that conflict is itself the dance of harmony. Historically, this concept of yin and yang was already present in Chinese cosmology before Laozi, but it was he who gave it spiritual depth. He saw in the union of opposites the pattern of the Tao itself, the yielding and the firm, the quiet and the active, the feminine and the masculine, all revolving endlessly in mutual completion. Where others saw contradiction, he saw complement. For him, peace was not found in the absence of opposition, but in their balance. A lesser-known historical note reveals that during the Warring States period, early Taoist thinkers used yin-yang theory to teach emotional equilibrium. They compared anger to excessive yang heat, expansion, aggression, and sadness to excess yin coldness, contraction, withdrawal. The sage, they said, was neither hot nor cold, but like spring mild, renewing, balanced. This subtle philosophy later influenced traditional Chinese medicine, which treats health as harmony between forces. The same applies to the spirit. Too much striving burns, too much fear freezes. The art of living is the art of keeping warm without overheating, cool without going numb. A rarely mentioned story from ancient records describes a Taoist musician who tuned his chin a 7-stringed zither before every performance. When asked why he spent more time tuning than playing, he said, "Because if one string is too tight, it breaks. If too loose, it sags. Only balance brings music." Laozi's view of life mirrors that instrument. The melody of existence depends on tension held lightly, never forced. Stress appears when we tighten the strings of life too much, when expectations stretch beyond their natural limit. The remedy is not to stop playing, but to retune gently, to rediscover harmony before continuing the song. In nature, balance governs everything. Rivers overflow, then recede. Storms rage, then clear. The Tao's wisdom lies in its self-correcting rhythm. Laozi observed that every extreme contains the seed of its opposite. Misfortune hides within fortune. Fortune rests within misfortune. The moment we cling to one side of the cycle, we begin to suffer. Joy becomes addiction. Ambition becomes exhaustion. Love becomes control. Harmony, on the other hand, requires acceptance of flux, the understanding that nothing stays. And that's what keeps everything alive. One little-known commentary by Han Feizi, a philosopher influenced by Laozi, interprets harmony as the ruler's greatest art. He wrote that a wise leader must balance firmness and compassion like the alternation of yin and yang. If he punishes without mercy, rebellion grows. If he forgives without limit, chaos spreads. Only through rhythm, a harmony of opposites, can stability endure. This same wisdom applies inwardly. A person who lives only in productivity burns out. One who lives only in retreat stagnates. The sage alternates naturally, like breathing effort and rest, involvement and solitude, each nourishing the other. In modern life, imbalance is often mistaken for success. We praise constant motion, constant output, constant growth. But Laozi would see this as a sickness of excess yang heat without coolness, action without rest. Stress is the symptom of a life tuned too tight. To restore balance, we must reintroduce stillness. Yin not as laziness, but as restoration. The night is not the enemy of day. It is the mother of light. A fascinating and little-known connection can be found in the Taiji diagram, the black and white swirl later created by Taoist thinkers centuries after Laozi. Within the dark is a seed of light. Within the light, a seed of dark. This symbol captures Laozi's deepest lesson, that peace is not found in uniformity, but in dynamic balance. Stress disappears when we stop fighting the ebb and flow, when we let life alternate as it must. In relationships, this principle transforms understanding. Arguments soften when one person remembers to be yin while the other burns yang. Listening balances speaking. Patience balances passion. Laozi's harmony is not about sameness, but complementarity. Each difference completes the other. To live harmoniously is not to suppress conflict, but to allow it to find its rhythm until it becomes cooperation. Ultimately, Laozi's vision of harmony is cosmic and personal at once. The Tao holds all opposites in a single embrace. To live by that model is to stop dividing life into good and bad, success and failure, pleasure and pain. Everything changes, and each change maintains the whole. The sage feels no stress because he knows that imbalance corrects itself, that every winter carries spring within it. When you understand this, there is nothing left to resist, only the dance of the Tao, spinning eternally between shadow and light. If harmony is the rhythm of the Tao, then Pu, the uncarved block, is its form before form. Laozi used this image as one of his most profound metaphors, a block of raw wood, untouched, undefined, and perfectly whole. The uncarved block has no desires. He wrote, "When it is cut, it becomes useful and thus begins its decay." In this simple image lies a philosophy of innocence, authenticity, and freedom from over-definition. For Laozi, stress begins the moment we start carving ourselves, shaping, refining, performing instead of simply being. Historically, the symbol of Pu emerged during a time when civilization worshipped refinement, intricate rituals, ornate music, complex hierarchies. Laozi saw that with every layer of sophistication came another layer of tension. The more rules people invented, the less spontaneous they became. The more cleverness grew, the more simplicity died. His radical insight was that perfection is not improvement, but restoration, a return to one's natural state before the knife of culture divides the self into roles. A lesser-known commentary from the Han Dynasty explains that Pu represents the original nature before names. It means the essence of a thing before judgment arises, the way a mountain exists before someone calls it beautiful or ugly, the way a child laughs before worrying about whether it sounds proper. The uncarved block is not ignorance, but wholeness. Once carved, it can no longer be anything else. Before carving, it can be everything. One obscure but revealing story tells of a carpenter named Qi, who was famous for crafting wheels so perfectly balanced they spun for decades. When a duke asked him for the secret, the old man replied, "When I carve too lightly, it slips. Too hard, it resists. Between them, there is a rhythm I cannot explain. I feel it in my hands." When the duke pressed him for instruction, the carpenter shook his head. "What I know cannot be put into words. It lies in the uncarved." This story, often cited in later Taoist texts, illustrates Laozi's wisdom. True mastery comes not from learning more, but from remembering what you once knew before you tried so hard. In human terms, Pu is our natural mind before conditioning. before ambition, before fear, a child plays freely, moves intuitively, feels deeply, and forgets quickly. This is Pu in motion. As we age, society begins carving be strong, be efficient, be smart, be more. Every cut defines us, but each one also limits us. Stress arises not because life is heavy, but because we carry too many definitions of who we must be. Laozi's teaching invites us to unlearn, to return to the soft wood of being itself. A rarely mentioned connection can be found in early Taoist meditation. Practitioners would visualize an uncarved piece of jade in their hearts, shining with natural purity. Each breath polished it without shaping it, a symbolic act of returning to one's untouched essence. They believed that as the jade cleared, so did the spirit. Stress, they said, was merely the dust that settles when one forgets their inner simplicity. The practice of Pu was to stop carving, stop striving, and let the jade shine again. Laozi's idea of Pu also contains a political wisdom. He warned rulers that excessive laws and systems carve a state into rigidity. The more prohibitions there are, he wrote, the poorer the people become. To govern well is to preserve Pu, to keep the people simple, not in ignorance, but in naturalness. When people live by their nature, harmony arises on its own. When rulers interfere too much, rebellion follows. History would prove him right countless times. Dynasties that sought control fell, while those that allowed spontaneity flourished, even briefly, in peace. In modern life, Pu feels almost impossible. From childhood, we are carved by education, expectation, and competition. We measure worth in productivity and mistake complexity for intelligence. Laozi's lesson is not to reject learning, but to balance it with unlearning. Wisdom grows in silence, not accumulation. The more you try to define yourself, the more you forget what you are. The uncarved self is not empty. It is limitless. A beautiful but little-known line from the Guanzi. Another ancient text influenced by Laozi reads, "When the block remains whole, the world is at rest." It means that when people live from their original nature, without endless carving of identity and ambition, the collective heart of humanity settles. Stress, then, is not a personal failure. It is a civilizational habit of carving too much, too fast, too often. To live as Pu is to walk gently through life without decoration, to rediscover the power of plainness. Laozi praised the plain and the simple because they last. The flashy burns bright and fades. The plain endures. He saw the sage as one who wears coarse clothing but holds jade within. It is the purity beneath the surface, not the polish on top, that keeps one free. To be uncarved is to be unburdened. And in that wholeness, stress cannot find a place to cut. If the uncarved block teaches wholeness, then nature reveals its rhythm. For Laozi, the Tao was not a theory, but the living pattern of the natural world. Man follows the earth, he wrote. Earth follows heaven. Heaven follows the Tao, and the Tao follows what is natural. In this simple chain of alignment lies a profound truth. The closer we live to nature's pace, the less we suffer. The further we drift with clocks, deadlines, and artificial ambitions, the more stress becomes our constant companion. Laozi's path to peace was not an escape from life, but a reunion with its original flow. Historically, ancient China was an agricultural civilization. People lived by the cycles of planting and harvest. Laozi's philosophy drew deeply from this environment. He saw in nature an intelligence that required no instruction, rain falling without command, grass growing without effort, rivers flowing without confusion. The farmer could till and sow, but he could not hurry the seed. Patience was not optional, it was survival. Laozi extended this insight to the human soul. Rushing the seasons of life brings only disorder. To be restless, he warned, is to lose the root. A lesser-known story tells that when Laozi served as the keeper of archives for the Zhou court, he would often leave his post at dawn to wander in the forests outside the city. Once, when reprimanded for neglecting his duties, he replied calmly, "I am studying the Tao by observing how the wind moves the leaves." Those walks, chronicled centuries later by disciples, were said to inspire several chapters of the Tao Te Ching. He learned not from books, but from the effortless governance of nature, the quiet law of adaptation. This reverence for nature evolved into the Taoist way of living in rhythm. Ancient Taoists timed their activities with the elements, meditating at dawn to align with the rising yang, resting at dusk to honor the returning yin. Even eating and breathing were harmonized with the seasons. They believed that when a person's daily life resonated with these natural patterns, illness and stress disappeared. The idea may sound mystical, but modern chronobiology, the study of biological clocks, confirms it. Living out of sync with natural cycles disrupts hormones, mood, and immunity. Laozi knew this not through science, but through silence. A little-known passage in early Taoist texts describes the sage's mind as like the valley. The valley receives everything: sunlight, rain, wind without resistance. It does not chase the clouds or curse the storm. It simply allows. In the same way, when we live in rhythm with nature, we stop arguing with what is. We rest when tired, speak when moved, act when the time is ripe. This rhythm dissolves stress because it removes conflict between inner pace and outer reality. The modern world, obsessed with urgency, has forgotten this balance. Our bodies whisper pause, but our schedules shout go. Laozi's wisdom offers the cure: return to the valley. There is a remarkable, rarely discussed historical example of this philosophy in practice. During the Tang dynasty, a Taoist priest named Sima Chengzhen advised Emperor Xuanzong to govern according to seasonal rhythm. He told him to rest the empire's armies in winter and rebuild its canals in spring, mirroring the natural ebb and flow of energy. The result was decades of prosperity and minimal conflict. Sima called this the rhythm of heaven applied to man. It was the political embodiment of Laozi's insight that force is rarely needed when one acts in season. Nature's rhythm also teaches humility. Mountains rise and crumble, rivers flood and recede, forests burn and regrow. Nothing clings to permanence, yet nothing truly ends. Laozi saw in this endless cycle the secret to peace. To live is to change. Stress arises when we demand stillness from a world that moves. Harmony comes when we move with it. Just as water follows the terrain, the wise follow time's unfolding without resistance. A subtle but telling observation from early Taoist ecology says that when people act without excess, the land heals itself. Overfishing, overbuilding, overworking, all these come from a mind detached from rhythm. The sage takes only what he needs, trusts renewal, and leaves the rest. This restraint is not morality, but alignment. It arises from understanding that everything is already part of one living system. When that understanding deepens, gratitude replaces greed, and stress fades into reverence. Modern seekers can rediscover this by small acts, walking barefoot on the earth, waking with the light, eating seasonally, breathing deeply in open air. These are not trends of mindfulness. They are ancient acts of remembering. When we breathe with the wind and move with the moon, the body remembers its origin. The mind quiets. The illusion of separation dissolves. For Laozi, nature was not a teacher standing outside of us. It was our reflection. We are not visitors on the earth, but expressions of it. To resist its rhythm is to resist ourselves. But to live in rhythm is to find what all the sages sought, not eternal youth, not endless success, but simple harmony. The stress of modern life is, in truth, a symptom of forgetting this belonging. The cure is as near as the next sunrise, as soft as the next breath. Remember the Tao, and let nature breathe through you once more. If nature restores rhythm to the body, then silence restores rhythm to the mind. Laozi saw silence not as the absence of sound, but as the space where truth reveals itself. Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know. He wrote, capturing one of his most paradoxical yet profound insights. To him, words are like ripples on the surface of a pond. They may glitter for a moment, but they disturb the reflection beneath. In still water, you can see the moon clearly. In stillness of mind, you can see reality as it is. Stress, in contrast, is a storm, too many ripples, too much noise, too little reflection. Historically, Laozi's philosophy emerged in a culture that revered speech. Confucius taught eloquence. Orators rose to power. Poets competed for fame. But Laozi turned away from language as the path to truth. He had watched rulers argue over words while their kingdoms decayed. He saw that talk often substitutes for understanding, and that constant chatter is a form of inner turbulence. His silence was not disdain, but medicine. To fall quiet, he believed, was to return to the Tao's original sound, the hum of existence itself. A lesser-known historical account tells of Laozi's meetings with Confucius, who once visited him seeking advice. Confucius, famous for his moral sermons, asked the old master about virtue. Laozi, it is said, listened in silence until the younger philosopher grew uncomfortable. Then he replied softly, "The good do not debate virtue. They embody it." Confucius left humbled, later telling his disciples, "I have met the dragon." That silence, more powerful than argument, changed the course of Chinese thought forever. Centuries later, early Taoist monks made silence their central discipline. In mountain hermitages, they practiced Zuo Wang, sitting and forgetting. They sat for hours, letting thoughts drift like clouds, neither grasping nor rejecting them. Over time, they said, the mind would dissolve its boundaries until only still awareness remained. One rare passage from the Zhuangzi describes a master who sat so still that birds nested in his sleeves. To outsiders, this looked like passivity. To the Taoist, it was perfect alignment. When nothing is forced, even silence becomes alive. Modern neuroscience would later call this quiet wakefulness the state where the brain, freed from constant stimulation, reorganizes itself. Laozi grasped this intuitively. Silence, for him, was not emptiness, but renewal, the mind's way of healing from overuse. Just as a field must lie fallow to remain fertile, the mind must rest from noise to regain clarity. Stress accumulates when we fill every pause, every breath, every hour. Silence dissolves it like sunlight through mist. A lesser-known detail from Han Dynasty inscriptions describes how Taoist priests used wind chimes not to make sound, but to remind listeners of its absence. The chime's purpose was to bring attention to the silence between its notes, to awaken the awareness that silence itself was the teacher. This delicate understanding would later influence Zen monks, who used bells for the same reason, not to mark time, but to call the mind home. In politics, too, Laozi's silence was revolutionary. He taught that the best ruler is one whose presence is barely felt. When the master governs, the people say, "We did it ourselves." In silence, authority becomes invisible, and harmony arises without coercion. The same applies inwardly when the ego falls silent. The spirit governs effortlessly. Stress vanishes because the need to control, explain, or prove disappears. Silence also connects deeply with compassion. Laozi believed that noise, both external and internal, drowns out empathy. To truly hear another, one must first quiet oneself. In stillness, we perceive the subtleties that words mistone, breath, the truth between sentences. One lesser-known Taoist saying goes, "When the heart is silent, heaven speaks." This heaven is not a deity, but the subtle wisdom of the Tao that becomes audible only in quiet minds. In modern times, silence has become rare, even feared. We fill it with music, notifications, conversations, anything to avoid meeting ourselves. Laozi would call this a tragedy. For in silence, one encounters the source of all calm, the realization that nothing needs to be added. The world, as it is, already hums with balance. The rivers murmur, the wind in the leaves, the slow rhythm of breath. These are the universe speaking in its first language. To practice silence is not to withdraw, but to listen. Laozi's sage walks through a noisy world, yet remains inwardly still, carrying the calm of the mountains within. This silence is contagious. It softens conversations, slows anger, restores perspective. In its embrace, stress loses its echo, and peace takes its place. The mind becomes like a mirror, clear, reflective, and undisturbed. Ultimately, Laozi's silence is not about muting the world, but harmonizing with it. When speech arises from stillness, it carries truth. When action arises from stillness, it carries grace. When life is lived from stillness, it carries no stress, only flow. In silence, the Tao speaks not in words, but in the sound of everything breathing together. And in that shared breath, we remember what Laozi always knew, that the way is quiet, and peace begins when we are two. If silence heals the inner world, then humility heals the outer one. Laozi's vision of peace was not confined to the self. It extended into the realm of leadership, society, and power. He believed that the true art of governance, whether over a kingdom or over one's own heart, lies in non-interference. The best ruler, he wrote, is one whose existence the people barely know. His political philosophy was a mirror of his metaphysical one, just as the Tao sustains creation without domination. So should the wise lead by aligning with natural order, not by imposing will. Historically, this idea was radical. The spring and autumn period of China was defined by political chaos and ceaseless warfare. Each state competed to expand its influence, and rulers believed control was achieved only through law and punishment. Laozi, observing this from within the bureaucracy of the Zhou court, saw the futility. Every new rule created new rebellion. Every show of power birthed more fear. He proposed instead that the greatest ruler acts like the Tao itself, quietly, invisibly, nurturing stability through gentleness. The less one interferes, the more harmony arises. A rarely cited historical text records an encounter between Laozi and a military general who sought advice before a campaign. The general boasted of his strategies and victories. Laozi listened silently, then said, "The strongest soldier is one who never draws his sword. Win without pride, lead without force, and leave no trace behind." The general, puzzled, dismissed him as naive. Yet months later, his army fell to exhaustion, undone not by the enemy, but by its own aggression. Centuries afterward, his story was retold as a parable of Wu Wei, the failure of strength untempered by humility. Laozi's political vision was not weakness, it was wisdom. He understood that control breeds tension at every level: the family, the state, the self. The more laws and commands there are, he wrote, the more thieves and rebels appear. Stress in society, like stress in the mind, arises from over-regulation. When people are trusted to follow their nature, they do. When suffocated by authority, they rebel. The sage governs by example, not decree. His humility allows life to self-correct. A little-known historical influence of Laozi's thought can be found in the Han Dynasty's early emperors, especially Emperor Wen and Emperor Jing, who practiced what historians later called Huang Lao governance, a synthesis of Taoist principles and practical politics. They lowered taxes, minimized interference, and allowed the empire's natural rhythms, agriculture, trade, and local governance to flow with minimal obstruction. The result was nearly 4 decades of peace and prosperity, a golden age born not from conquest, but from restraint. Laozi's wisdom had moved from philosophy into policy, but humility in Laozi's teaching went beyond politics. It was a cosmic posture. He saw pride as a violation of the Tao's symmetry. He who stands on tiptoe cannot stand firm. He warned, to overreach is to fall out of balance. The proud expand like fire, brilliant for a moment, but doomed to consume themselves. The humble, like water, remain low and enduring. Stress arises in those who strive to stand above others. Peace belongs to those content to flow beneath. A fascinating yet often overlooked detail from the Huainanzi describes humility as the root of heaven. It claims that the universe itself bends downward, that rivers flow to the sea. Rain falls to nourish the earth. Clouds descend to become water again. In this descent, all things find completion. Laozi's humility is thus not submission, but participation in the great descent, the returning of power to service, of knowledge to silence. In personal life, humility dissolves the illusion of control that fuels stress. When one no longer needs to prove, defend, or dominate, the heart rests naturally. The humble person listens more than they speak, acts more than they announce, and gives more than they keep. A little-known Taoist proverb says, "The valley receives because it is lower than the mountain." To be humble, then, is to create space for peace to flow in. Laozi also warned against the illusion of moral superiority. In his eyes, even virtue becomes corruption when wielded as pride. When the Tao is lost, there arises virtue. When virtue is lost, benevolence. When benevolence is lost, righteousness. He saw how societies replace natural goodness with rigid virtue once they stray from simplicity. The sage, by contrast, does good without trying. His humility prevents self-conscious virtue, an effortless morality born of alignment, not performance. A lesser-known tale from later Taoist lore tells of an old fisherman who refused royal invitations to serve at court. When asked why he would not accept such honor, he replied, "The fish that leaps highest into the sun is the first to be caught." His humility was his freedom. Like Laozi, he understood that visibility attracts disturbance. The one who stays low, unseen, and quiet remains in peace. In modern terms, Laozi's humility challenges the culture of constant self-promotion. We are taught to broadcast our worth, to climb every ladder, to assert identity at every turn. Yet this endless upward striving is what fractures the spirit. The humble live lighter. They do not carry the burden of image. Their peace is not an act, but an atmosphere. Ultimately, Laozi's politics of humility is a mirror of his metaphysics. Both seek to dissolve ego, whether the ego of the ruler or the ego of the mind. The less we interfere, the more the world aligns itself. The less we demand recognition, the more influence we quietly hold. Stress, in the end, is a symptom of pride, the tension of trying to hold the sky. Humility releases it. When we learn to bow, the weight lifts. The sage does not conquer kingdoms. He conquers the self. His crown is stillness, his throne the ground. And from that ground, he rules not with command, but with calm. For when one becomes like the valley, the rivers of the world find their way to rest there. If humility is the posture of peace, then freedom from the self is its deepest form. Laozi's entire philosophy of water, emptiness, softness, and silence leads to this final liberation, the quiet disappearance of the I. He saw the self not as a stable entity, but as a mirage created by thought, a carving made from what was once whole. He who defines himself cannot truly know himself. He wrote, "He who glorifies himself has not yet found the Tao." To be free of stress, one must be free of the constant narrative of self, the voice that says I must, I should, I am not enough. Historically, this idea placed Laozi far ahead of his time. While most philosophies sought to strengthen the self through virtue or discipline, Laozi sought to dissolve it entirely. He observed that the ego is the root of conflict between nations, between neighbors, between thoughts. The moment there is I, there is mine, and where there is mine, there is fear of loss. Laozi's solution was not self-denial, but self-forgetting. The sage, he said, has no self, and therefore no enemy. A lesser-known ancient story tells of a court musician who once asked Laozi how to achieve perfection in performance. Laozi replied, "Play until there is no player." The musician was confused. How could one play without the self? Laozi smiled. When the self disappears, only the music remains. Weeks later, the musician returned, weeping with joy. "I played," he said, and it was as if the melody played itself. Laozi simply nodded. That, he explained, is freedom. In Taoist thought, the self is the greatest source of stress because it divides what is undivided. It creates boundaries between me and the world, success and failure, yesterday and today. This illusion of separation leads to endless striving, the need to defend, to compare, to prove. Laozi saw the truth more clearly. The Tao has no borders, and neither do we. The one who realizes this lives as naturally as water flows unopposed, undefined, at rest in every motion. One rare commentary from the Heishanggong school interprets Laozi's line, "The sage has no mind of his own," as meaning that he does not cling to personal opinions or identity. His awareness moves as circumstances move. To modern readers, this might sound like passivity, but to Laozi, it was supreme flexibility, a state where the self no longer interrupts the Tao's flow. When there is no I to claim experience, life itself becomes effortless action. A lesser-known parallel appears in the teachings of Zhuangzi, Laozi's philosophical heir. Zhuangzi tells of a man who dreamed he was a butterfly, and upon waking, did not know whether he was a man dreaming of a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming of a man. The point was not confusion, but liberation. When the boundaries of self dissolve, reality widens. Stress fades, because the dreamer no longer fears change, for who can suffer loss when he sees that all forms are fluid? In modern psychology, we glimpse echoes of Laozi's wisdom in the idea of ego dissolution, often described during deep meditative or flow states. When the sense of separate self quiets, brain regions associated with rumination deactivate, and stress hormones fall. What remains is pure presence awareness without commentary. Laozi knew this long before science, that the mind at peace is not one that thinks less, but one that identifies less with its thoughts. One little-known anecdote from early Taoist tradition tells of the monk Wang Bi meditating beside a waterfall. When asked what he sought there, he replied, "To forget that I am Wang Bi." The act of forgetting, for the Taoist, was sacred. Forgetting was not ignorance, but unity, the fading of artificial lines between observer and observed. To lose the self is to regain the whole. Laozi's teaching is not nihilistic. He did not ask us to erase our humanity, only to loosen our grip on its edges. The sage still eats, laughs, weeps, and loves, but without ownership. He lives through experience rather than around it. Because he does not call things mine, he cannot lose them. And because he does not call thoughts me, he cannot be consumed by them. Stress, which feeds on possession, starves in such a life. A fascinating historical echo appears centuries later in Chan Buddhism, where monks quoted Laozi's lines to illustrate no self-wu-wo. One text records a monk saying, "When I am hungry, I eat. When tired, I sleep. Fools laugh, but the wise see the Tao." This simplicity was not detachment, but intimacy, living so closely with the present that the self disappears into the act. Laozi had sown the seed of this centuries before, that peace is not a reward, but a return, the return to the place before the word I. In ordinary life, this freedom means moving lightly through the world. You still play your part, parent, worker, friend, but without the constant commentary of, "How am I doing?" The performance continues, yet the performer vanishes. The world, once heavy with obligation, becomes fluid again. This is the secret at the heart of Laozi's teaching. The less of you there is, the more of life can pass through you. As the Tao Te Ching says, "He who loses himself is preserved. He who preserves himself is lost." It is the final reversal in Laozi's long list of paradoxes to find freedom. One must forget the one who seeks it. When the self dissolves, the war within ends. What remains is not nothingness, but peace vast, quiet, and whole. If freedom from the self is awakening, then the return to the Tao is completion. For Laozi, all paths of effortlessness, humility, emptiness, and softness lead back to the same destination, the remembrance of the way. Returning is the motion of the Tao. He wrote, "Yielding is its function." In those 2 lines, the cycle of existence is revealed. Everything that rises must fall. Everything that expands must return. And every life eventually circles back to its source. This return is not loss, but restoration, the quiet homecoming of things to their origin. Historically, this idea arose from a culture that revered cycles of the moon, the harvest, and the seasons. But Laozi elevated it beyond observation into a principle of peace. He saw that nature's rhythm of return mirrored the rhythm of the human spirit. Just as rivers run to the sea and clouds return as rain, our hearts, no matter how far they wander, long to return to stillness. Stress, in this light, is the resistance to return, the refusal to rest, to yield, to let go. Peace begins the moment we stop running from the inevitable, that all things move in circles, not lines. A lesser-known legend tells of a student who once asked Laozi what happens after death. The sage pointed to the setting sun and said, "The day becomes night, but the light never dies." For Laozi, death was not an end, but a transformation, a return to the formless Tao that gives birth to all form. In the same way, every ending in life of youth, love, ambition, or certainty is simply another return. To resist this is to suffer. To accept it is to align with the way. In later Taoist tradition, this returning became a form of spiritual practice called Fan Ben Gui Yuan, to return to the root and go back to the source. Practitioners meditated on the idea that the breath, the mind, and the world were all currents of the same flow. By tracing their thoughts back to stillness and their breath back to calm, they symbolically reenacted the universe's own motion of return. A rarely discussed text from the Neye Inner Training describes it beautifully. When the heart is at peace, the Tao gathers there. To return to stillness is to make oneself a home for the Tao. One fascinating historical echo of Laozi's teaching appears in the life of Ge Hong, a Taoist scholar of the 4th century CE. Ge Hong wrote that immortality was not the endless extension of life, but the endless return to simplicity. The one who knows how to return, he said, already lives forever. In this interpretation, Laozi's return becomes not metaphysical, but psychological. The daily act of coming back to breath, to presence, to ease in a world that constantly pulls us away. To Laozi, this motion of returning was also the essence of wisdom. Know the white, but keep to the black, he advised, meaning, understand brightness but dwell in stillness. The wise are those who know the outer world, but return often to the inner one. Just as day requires night to rest, doing requires being to renew. Stress, he might say, is the state of forgetting to return, of getting trapped in the outward motion of life without circling back to the inward quiet where meaning lives. A lesser-known anecdote from Taoist oral tradition tells of a hermit who once descended from his mountain home to teach city dwellers about peace. They asked him what enlightenment felt like. He replied, "It is like drinking water. When you are thirsty, you go to the stream, you drink, and you return." His listeners were disappointed by the simplicity of the answer. But that was precisely the point. The Tao is not a distant goal. It is the constant returning to what is natural, essential, and real. Even in modern life, this wisdom applies. Each breath offers a return inhale to expand, exhale to release. Every day offers a chance to come back from noise to silence, from speed to stillness, from thinking to awareness. Laozi would remind us that peace is not found in avoiding motion, but in remembering the still point at the center of it all. The way is constant, he wrote, and returning to it is destiny. A subtle, rarely discussed passage from the Tao Te Ching adds one more layer. Returning to the root is called tranquility. Tranquility is called returning to life. Here, Laozi equates calmness with renewal. When we return to the root, to what we were before thought, ambition, or identity, life itself refreshes. In this state, stress cannot survive because it feeds on disconnection. The moment we return, we are whole again. There is a cosmic humility in this teaching. Everything, no matter how vast or mighty, bows to the rhythm of return. Mountains erode to dust, stars collapse to darkness, even galaxies swirl back into silence. Yet in each return lies rebirth. Dust forms new soil. Darkness births new stars. Laozi's insight is that this rhythm does not only govern the universe, it governs the heart. To rest is to renew, to yield is to grow, to return is to live. And so, when life feels fragmented and stress seems endless, Laozi whispers the same invitation: come back. Return to breath, to body, to stillness, to simplicity, to the root of things. For the way never leaves, only we do. And every moment of remembering is already a return. If returning to the Tao marks completion, then its echo through the ages is renewal. Laozi's words did not end with his disappearance. They became a current flowing beneath centuries of thought, resurfacing whenever humanity forgot how to breathe. The way, he said, never acts, yet nothing is left undone. In the modern world, we might say balance requires no struggle, and healing requires no command. The resonance of the Tao has rippled through cultures, from ancient monasteries to modern minds seeking calm amid chaos. Historically, Laozi's influence extended beyond philosophy into art, medicine, and even science. During the Han and Tang dynasties, Taoism shaped Chinese cosmology, the understanding of nature as an organic whole. Physicians studied the balance of qi. Engineers designed canals according to the natural flow of rivers. And poets like Li Bai and Wang Wei found inspiration in the mountain stillness. The Tao was not a religion of belief, but a culture of alignment, a way of living so close to nature's pulse that art and ethics became one. A lesser-known historical detail reveals that during the Tang era, Laozi was officially honored as Taishang Laojun, the Grand Exalted One. Yet, despite this divine title, his teachings remained stubbornly human. Even emperors who worshipped him built temples of stone to honor a wisdom that had always lived in water and wind. The paradox persisted. The sage who vanished into silence became a god of simplicity. And yet, even in that transformation, his message endured that peace is not attained through worship, but through returning to what is natural. Modern psychology, neuroscience, and philosophy have quietly rediscovered what Laozi knew intuitively, that the nervous system, like the cosmos, seeks balance through flow, not force. The concept of Wu Wei mirrors the flow state described by modern thinkers like Csikszentmihalyi. The Taoist practice of stillness anticipates mindfulness. The yin-yang dynamic reflects the body's homeostasis. Laozi's wisdom was never mysticism, it was observation refined into grace. He watched the world and saw that it worked perfectly without interference. A rarely discussed connection lies in early Western philosophy. Scholars have noted striking parallels between Laozi and Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher who declared that everything flows panta rhei. Though they lived worlds apart, both saw harmony in tension, order in flux, unity in change. The East called it Tao, the West called it Logos. Their shared intuition was that the universe is not a machine, but a song, one that needs no conductor. Across centuries, Laozi's influence has re-emerged in surprising places. In the 20th century, quantum physicists such as Niels Bohr drew upon Taoist imagery to explain the paradoxical nature of reality, wave and particle, light and dark, being and non-being. The yin-yang symbol adorned Bohr's coat of arms with the motto, Contraria, sunt complementa, opposites are complementary. Laozi's voice had traveled from bamboo scrolls to modern physics, whispering the same truth: the universe works not by division, but by dance. A lesser-known episode from early 20th century China tells of a reformist teacher, Wang Biwen, who introduced Tao Te Ching into schools as a subject for mental health. He claimed that its teachings reduced student anxiety more effectively than discipline or reward. Teach them to rest, he said, and they will learn faster. Decades later, research in education would confirm his insight that relaxation enhances retention, that stillness is a condition for creativity. Laozi, it seems, had discovered neuroscience through poetry. In art, his influence continues to breathe through brush and ink. Chinese calligraphers, when painting characters from the Tao Te Ching, practiced Wu Wei in movement, letting the hand flow without hesitation, trusting the brush to find its line. The brush's freedom became the artist's freedom. Hesitation was considered interference. Even in the arts of Japan and Korea, the concept survived. Zen's Enso circle, drawn in one breath, captures the Tao's entire philosophy: imperfection as perfection, motion as stillness, form as emptiness. One rarely cited story from the Ming Dynasty tells of a monk who meditated by watching clouds drift across the sky. When asked why he never read scriptures, he replied, "The clouds are my Tao Te Ching." That single sentence sums up the continuity of Laozi's thought that his philosophy cannot be confined to a book. Every century, it rewrites itself in another form: in calligraphy, in architecture, in ecology, in meditation, even in modern sustainability movements that urge harmony with the earth. Today, when we speak of mindfulness, minimalism, and flow, we are speaking the language of Laozi without realizing it. The world, crowded with noise and speed, is once again rediscovering what he tried to tell kings and courtiers: that peace is not a possession, but a participation, a belonging to the natural rhythm that never ends. In this era of constant stress, Laozi's philosophy appears not as an ancient relic, but as a modern necessity. He does not promise escape, but integration. The world will remain noisy, but the heart can remain quiet within it. The river will continue to flow, but you can learn to float. To return to the Tao in modern life is simply to remember that you were never apart from it. Every pause, every breath, every moment of awareness is already homecoming. The echo of Laozi's wisdom grows stronger each century because it does not depend on time. The way is timeless precisely because it asks for nothing, it only invites. And when you accept, when you stop striving, When you begin to listen, you realize what he meant all along. The Tao never left. It is we who wandered. To rediscover it is not to find something new, but to awaken to what has always been flowing beneath your feet, whispering through your breath, and waiting patiently for your return. If the echo of the Tao renews through time, then learning to flow is how we make it real in our daily lives. Laozi's teachings were never meant to remain abstract. They were blueprints for living. The sage, he said, moves through the world like water going where it must, resting when it should. In these simple gestures lies the art of transforming emotional turbulence into harmony. To live by Wu Wei is not to withdraw from experience, but to glide within it, responding, not reacting, guiding, not gripping. Historically, this philosophy found its earliest application in Taoist self-cultivation practices, especially those of the Neye and Tao Te Ching commentaries. Early followers practiced breath control and slow, deliberate movement to synchronize body and mind with natural flow. From these exercises emerged later arts like Tai Chi and Qigong, where motion arises from stillness and effort dissolves into grace. The purpose was never athletic mastery, but alignment, the feeling that life itself moves through you, not against you. A lesser-known anecdote tells of a Taoist fisherman who never lost a single catch. When asked how he managed this, he said, "I fish by not fishing. I let the water decide." His words puzzled others, yet his meaning was pure Laozi when you stop forcing outcomes. Success arrives naturally. In modern language, this is emotional intelligence, the ability to adapt, to read the current, to move in harmony with what is rather than what should be. Psychologically, this flow mirrors what modern therapists describe as resonance. When one's emotions, body, and surroundings move in sync, tension dissolves. Laozi understood that stress is the friction between desire and reality, between where we want the current to go and where it's already flowing. The cure is not resistance, but rhythm. To flow is to participate consciously in life's motion, to align choice with inevitability. One fascinating historical detail appears in Taoist medicine, which viewed illness as a blockage of qi, the body's vital energy. Physicians like Zhang Zhongjing prescribed not only herbs, but also behavior rest when tired, breathe when angry, walk when restless. They taught that emotions, like rivers, must circulate. Stagnant anger becomes heat. Unexpressed grief becomes coldness. The Tao heals not by fighting the imbalance, but by restoring movement. Stress, in this sense, is the sickness of stillness, a current frozen by resistance. A rarely discussed passage from the Laozi, another Taoist classic, tells of a man who could ride the wind. When asked how he learned this ability, he replied, "By forgetting the weight of my body." Laozi would have smiled. To flow with the Tao, one must forget the weight, the burden of identity, fear, and control. The wind lifts only what is light. In the modern world, flow has become a word for productivity, but for Laozi, it meant presence. To flow is not to achieve, but to dissolve, to become so aligned with the moment that you disappear into it. When cooking, you become the flame. When walking, you become the wind. When speaking, you become the silence between words. This is not metaphor. It is direct experience. Anyone who has ever lost track of time while creating or felt peace while moving rhythmically has touched the Tao. A lesser-known Taoist practice called Shinsho Heart Hand used this principle in daily chores. Practitioners would wash rice, sweep floors, or weave cloth slowly and attentively, turning each action into meditation. The purpose was not efficiency, but intimacy to feel the Tao in ordinary motion. They believed that every act done with awareness refined qi and dissolved restlessness. In this way, even the most mundane task became sacred. Laozi's insight was that mastery of life requires the surrender of mastery itself. The stiff and unyielding are the companions of death, he wrote. The soft and yielding are the companions of life. Stress clings to control, but life rewards release. When we flow, decisions unfold. Naturally, timing replaces tension. Like a skilled surfer, the sage does not command the wave, but balances within it. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to listen, adjust, and glide. A little-known legend from the Song dynasty tells of a calligrapher who, frustrated with his shaky hand, burned his brushes in despair. That night he dreamed of Laozi, who said, "Write with the wind." When he awoke, he began painting again, this time following the natural motion of his breath. His lines grew alive, graceful, and spontaneous. The story became a parable that perfection emerges when effort disappears. To live by the Tao is to stop pushing against the river and learn to steer with it. This doesn't mean passivity, it means timing. The bird waits for the wind before taking flight. The farmer waits for the season before sowing. The wise do not force, yet they never delay. They act when the current calls and rest when it ebbs. Stress cannot survive in such a life because every motion is in agreement with reality. Ultimately, the philosophy of flow transforms resistance into art. It teaches that we do not overcome life, we accompany it. Laozi would say that when you move with the Tao, the very universe moves with you. You do not need to be fearless, only fluid. You do not need to win, only to align. And in that alignment, where will and world breathe together, the river of life carries you effortlessly toward peace. If flowing with life brings ease to action, then effortless living is the crown of Laozi's philosophy. It is the art of existing in such harmony with the way that even doing becomes being. The sage acts without effort and teaches without words. Laozi wrote, "This does not mean apathy or detachment, but the ultimate integration of wisdom into motion, a life where peace is not an interlude between struggles, but the atmosphere in which everything unfolds. Stress, then, is not a permanent condition, but a sign that we are living against the current." Historically, Laozi's disciples and later Taoists refined this principle into a complete way of life known as Ziran, meaning of itself, so the natural unfolding of existence without interference. In this worldview, the universe requires no management because it is already self-regulating. The seasons turn, the heart beats, and balance restores itself when left unhindered. Laozi saw this truth everywhere, from the clouds drifting without aim to the sprouting seed that never doubts its timing. Humans, he believed, are the only beings who forget how to live naturally. The result of that forgetting is anxiety, the silent war between what is and what we demand it to be. A lesser-known text from the Huainanzi elaborates on this with a story. A sage once entered a blacksmith shop and watched as molten metal flowed into molds. When asked what he saw, he replied, "The Tao at work. Fire, metal, and breath each follow their way, and together they make a blade. the craftsman asked, "and the man's role?" The sage smiled to blow when needed and to stop when the fire is bright. That was Wu Wei in its purest form, participation without interference. In daily life, Laozi's effortless living means this act fully, but let go immediately. When walking, walk. When eating, eat. When resting, rest. He called this the simplicity of the uncarved heart. Modern stress often comes from overlapping eating while working, working while worrying, worrying while resting. In Laozi's world, each act is complete in itself. Life becomes light because each moment carries only its own weight. A fascinating historical echo of this philosophy can be found in the scholar-poet Tao Yuanming, who abandoned a prestigious government post to live among fields and wild chrysanthemums. His friends pitied him, but he replied, "I pluck chrysanthemums under the eastern fence and gaze leisurely at the southern mountain." That line became immortal, a symbol of the Taoist life present, peaceful and whole. He was not escaping duty, but returning to rhythm. His poetry, simple yet eternal, embodies Laozi's effortless living, the recognition that meaning does not require ambition, beauty does not require control. A lesser-known Taoist parable tells of a cook who never sharpened his knife. When asked how it still cut perfectly, he answered, "I follow the spaces between the bones." This story, recorded in the Zhuangzi, expresses the secret of Wu Wei that the wise act not by force but by awareness. The cook did not hack through the joints. He moved with the grain of reality. His blade, like his spirit, remained unbroken. Stress dulls the mind because it hacks at life. Peace sharpens it because it listens for the spaces. In modern terms, this philosophy aligns with what psychologists call cognitive flow, the zone of seamless action where thinking and doing merge. But Laozi's teaching reaches further. Effortless living is not just a momentary state, but a way of being. It means trusting life enough to stop overcorrecting. It means walking the middle path between control and chaos, where one's movements are guided not by pressure, but by presence. A lesser-known historical example of effortless living in practice comes from the Tang-era physician Sun Simiao, revered as China's king of medicine. Though he treated thousands, he insisted that healing began with stillness. The doctor must first quiet his mind, for only in calmness can he sense the balance of qi. Patients said that being near him already made them feel better. This was Laozi's principle of the inner virtue radiating outward, doing good without effort. The same law applies to all things when you are aligned. Your presence alone brings harmony. Laozi's effortless life also redefines success. The world equates effort with value, yet the Tao teaches the opposite, that when action flows from alignment, less achieves more. The more rules and tools, the more confusion. He said, "The sage works lightly, speaks briefly, and trusts deeply." This simplicity multiplies results because it wastes no energy in resistance. Stress thrives on friction. Wu Wei removes it. The idea of effortless living also appears in the structure of Laozi's text itself. The Tao Te Ching repeats paradoxes like waves doing nothing, yet leaving nothing undone, until the reader stops trying to analyze and begins to feel their rhythm. In this way, the book is not a manual, but a meditation. The effort to understand dissolves into understanding itself. A beautiful, lesser-known image from later Taoist poetry describes this state. The wind passes through the bamboo, leaving no trace. The moon shines on the river, leaving no mark. To live effortlessly is to leave no mark, not because one fails to act, but because one's actions are in harmony with what is. The wind does not strain to move, it simply blows. The moon does not seek reflection, the river offers it freely. For Laozi, this is the highest form of freedom, to move in the world without struggle, to give without depletion, to act without residue. It is not escape from life, but mastery of it, a mastery that looks like surrender. When one lives this way, stress becomes impossible, for nothing within resists what is outside. The sage, Laozi says, takes no pride in what he has done. He accomplishes and forgets. That is the secret of serenity. To live effortlessly is to live without accumulation of possessions, of grudges, of self. In the clear current of such a life, every act returns immediately to stillness. And when one finally understands this, the line between peace and motion disappears. Everything, even effort, becomes easy. If effortless living is the crown of Laozi's wisdom, then to become one with the flow is its transcendence, the final dissolution of boundaries between self, world, and way. At this stage, Laozi no longer speaks of how to act or think, because all distinction between actor and action has vanished. The sage does not walk the Tao. He is the Tao. He does not seek peace. He is peace. This is the state beyond striving, beyond philosophy, the point where thought bows to awareness, and awareness merges with existence itself. Laozi described this mystery through paradox. The Tao is great, heaven is great, earth is great, and the sage is also great. In the universe, these four are great, and the sage follows the earth. The meaning is layered to become one, with the flow is not to ascend above the world, but to harmonize so deeply with it that the very distinction between high and low disappears. The sage's greatness lies not in separation, but in participation. He follows the earth because the earth follows heaven, and heaven follows the Tao. The circle closes, and stress born of separation dissolves completely. Historically, the concept of oneness with the Tao became the foundation of later Taoist mysticism. Texts like the Zhuangzi and Huainanzi describe sages entering states of fasting the mind, Xin Zhai, and sitting in forgetfulness, Zuo Wang, until they join heaven and earth. These descriptions were not metaphors for death, but awakenings, moments where identity melted into total awareness. When I forget myself, wrote Zhuangzi, I become the universe. It was the culmination of Laozi's insight to lose the self entirely is to gain the whole. A lesser-known story from the Laozi illustrates this beautifully. A disciple once asked his master how to know when one had united with the Tao. The master replied, "When you see no difference between your heartbeat and the rain." The disciple returned years later, saying, "I hear the rain, and I hear my heart, but they sound alike." The master smiled and said, "Then there is no longer rain, nor heart, only the way." This was the highest stage of Wu Wei, not doing without effort, but being without separation. In daily life, becoming one with the flow doesn't require withdrawal or mysticism. It manifests in small, radiant moments, a quiet breath before speaking, a sudden feeling of clarity while walking, a sense that time has stopped and everything is right. In those moments, the walls of I and world vanish. Stress cannot enter because there is no one left to resist it. This is not ecstasy, but intimacy, a closeness with life so total that even silence vibrates with meaning. Modern thinkers might call this a state of pure presence or non-dual awareness. Neuroscientists find that during such experiences, the brain's sense of self regions quiet down, replaced by networks of empathy and unity. It is as if the mind finally rests in the rhythm that has always carried it. Laozi's insight, once mystical, now has measurable proof when you stop defending the self. The body heals, the breath deepens, and perception expands. The way is physiological as much as it is spiritual. A lesser-known Taoist meditation, Rongdao merging with the Way, describe this unity through breath and imagery. Practitioners visualize themselves as clouds dissolving into the sky, rivers returning to the sea, or flames vanishing into light. The meditation ended with a vow, "I am the 10,000 things, and the 10,000 things are me." In this vow lies the purest antidote to stress. How can one be at war with what one is? Laozi's final gift was perspective that to fight life is to fight oneself, and to yield to it is to awaken. In Tao Te Ching, he ends not with commandments, but with humility. The Tao is hidden and nameless, yet it alone nourishes and completes all things. This closing paradox reminds us that the Way does not need us to find it. It simply waits for us to stop turning away. The flow is eternal, patient, and forgiving, ready to carry anyone who relaxes into its current. A little-known historical footnote says that when Laozi vanished beyond the Western Gate, the guard who watched him leave wept, saying, "The old master did not depart, he returned." Those words echo across centuries. To vanish into the Tao is not to disappear, but to become the wind itself, felt everywhere, owned by no one. In this state of oneness, all dichotomies work and rest. Life and death, success and failure fade into a single pulse. The world, once fragmented, becomes a seamless tapestry woven by the same thread of being. What once felt chaotic now feels choreographed. Even suffering becomes rhythm. Even endings feel soft. Laozi would call this the final return, the place where the river realizes it has always been the ocean. To live as one with the flow is to live without friction. It is to wake each morning without haste, act without hesitation, love without fear, and sleep without regret. It is to find, at last, that the Way is not a destination, but the very movement of life itself. And when this realization takes root, when the self fully joins the stream, peace ceases to be something you pursue. It becomes what you are. The night is quiet now. The teachings of Laozi, whispered across 20 centuries, have come full circle, not as commandments to obey, but as reminders to remember. The Tao was never far away. It was only hidden beneath noise, hurry, and the illusion of control. To make stress disappear completely, Laozi never told us to fight it. He told us to see through it, to recognize that it has no life of its own. It feeds on resistance, and the moment we stop resisting, it fades like mist under sunlight. The way of effortlessness is not a retreat from the world, but a return to participation, to live as water lives, to act as wind acts, to rest as mountains rest. The soft overcomes the hard, the still outlasts the restless. In this quiet reversal lies liberation. Each time you yield instead of strain, you align with the universe itself. Each breath becomes an act of remembrance. You are not separate from the flow, you are the flow. As modern life accelerates, Laozi's wisdom feels more like prophecy. We build systems to manage time and emotions, Yet forget that peace was the simplest system of all rhythm. When you breathe with awareness, move with care, speak from stillness, you return to that rhythm. You rediscover what Laozi discovered beneath the sky of ancient China, that the way does not need our perfection, only our presence. So let the world turn. Let plans unfold and dissolve. Let success and failure trade places in their endless dance. You do not have to chase calmness. You need only stop disturbing it. The Tao was never elsewhere. It was the quiet pulse beneath your ribs, the invisible order within every breath. To find it is to stop searching. To live it is to rest. Finally, in the grace of being, sleep deeply, traveler of the way. The universe moves gently tonight, and so should you. Sweet dreams.